Hello, screenwriters, and welcome to Writing for Screens. Behind the script, Jane. My name is Glenn Gers, and I am the Chief Operating Everything for Writing for Screens, and I come to you live every Tuesday and Thursday, if I can make it, at 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time Zone, to try to talk to you about the art, the craft, and somewhat the business of writing for screens. Small screens, web series, TV shows, movies, trying to get the basics of writing across, trying to show you the things I have learned in my 25-year career writing for TV and movies. On my way out of the business, I am retiring. I thought I would leave behind some of the things I had to figure out for myself, things I had to teach myself, so that you don't have to teach them yourself. You can just look at them here. These are not a grand screenwriting theory. It is not the right answer. It is not the only way to do this. It's just stuff I figured out, tools, techniques, skills, processes that seem to help me. I think they're helpful for you, so I have put them on my channel. I have put them in very short lessons. This is a screen grab of my channel main page. As you will notice, there are 3 playlists on the first page there. They are Screenwriting Essentials, Screenwriting Tools, Skills, and Craft, and The Process, Being a Writer. These are the first 3 playlists on my channel. I made them the first 3 because they're really important. Everything I really have to tell you is in these short lessons. Each one's about 10 minutes. The topic of the lesson is the title and the thumbnail. So you can just browse the thumbnail and see what I have to say about genre, flashbacks, dialogue, etc. Check them out. They are things that you can try, but you will have to figure out if they work for you, because everyone has to figure out their own way of doing things and their own creative goals. There is not a right answer. There is not only one way to do any of it. All right, let me do some quick hellos and we're going to get deep into this episode. Hi, Nathan. Hi, Michael and Jenny and Hopfner. And Wolf, the gang's all here. And Donna, buongiorno to you too. Okay, so here's the deal. Today we are going behind the script. The title of the script is Jane. It is a low-budget horror script that I wrote in 2017. And I am going to do just try to talk mainly about the things I think you can learn from it. I'm not going to go line by line through this one. There is a link to the script. You can get your own PDF of the script and read it at your leisure. The link is in the description already. Or if for some reason you don't like links, here, if you go to my website, this is sort of a little graphic explaining. If you scroll down on my website, you will get to that little grid of rectangles. One of them, which looks like this, is marked Creative. If you click that, you will see another grid within that with a lot of projects of mine that you can look at. The very first one you'll see there, although this may change over time, but right now it says Jane Script. Can't get any simpler than that. Jane Script. The title is Jane. You click on that, it will open a link. You click the link, it will give you the PDF. You can read the whole script. So I'm not going to show you the whole script. I'm just going to talk about things I think you can learn. It's a horror script. Just to be real clear, triggering stuff is involved. It is about sexual abuse, rape. There is violence, especially male violence, and there is a supernatural female response to this violence. That's what the story is about. So I just want to warn you that that's there. I think that the point of this legitimizes the opening up of those subjects, because it's about that. It's trying to explore what those feelings feel like in my creative estimation. Hi, Thumper. So the main thing is it's a horror script. It is a way to explore horrifying things in life through the genre of the scary story. And that's really what horror is. So going to start by talking about how it was written, how this came to be. Because the way that this came to be is I did a movie which was sort of a thriller. It wasn't a horror movie at all, but Blumhouse produced it. Blumhouse, I knew the people at Blumhouse, and so when I wrote that thriller script, it was called Like, Share, Follow. It is on YouTube. You can see that for free. They at Blumhouse, they had a kind of plan or business plan or program at the time in which they were saying, we're going to make a bunch of ultra low budget movies, under $1 million, ideally a lot under $1 million, and therefore we can afford to make a lot of them. If they are not commercial, we didn't lose that much, and if one of them hits, it will pay for all of them plus. That was their business plan at the time. This was about 10 years ago, 2013-ish. So I gave them this script. They liked it. We made it. It was a cool experience. I will get into that some other time. When I was finishing it up, they were like, what do you want to do next? And what I had wanted to do next, and I had told them early on, the thing I really wanted to do most was a romantic comedy. That was the passion project of my life. It's called Fail. I'm definitely going to do a behind the script on that. So I said, I want to do Fail next, but you guys don't do romantic comedies. And they said, you never know. We might, especially ultra low budget, which was my specialty. So I was like, cool, I'm going to do a romantic comedy with Blumhouse. As it got nearer to the time to actually commit to that, I thought, why ask them to do something that they are not comfortable with, that they are not good at, which they, to their credit, they were willing to give it a shot. And I thought, why not take advantage of Blumhouse's reputation and skill set and make a real horror movie? Because the thing I was making was not a horror movie, it was a thriller. So I said, what can I do with horror, with low budget horror? Because the deal at the time with Blumhouse was, if you stay under a certain budget and we approve the script, you can do what you want. It's much more creative freedom because there's so little for them to lose. Once it got into post, they said they got a little more hands-on. So I was like, you know what? Cool. I love horror. I feel like much of horror is not good enough for me. The character work and the story is shabby compared to the horror stuff. I wanted to do a really character-based horror movie. So I had a lot of ideas, and I worked up into great detail 4 pitches. The first one I eventually did write. It's called Of the Shadows, and I will try to put that up here for you too, which was sort of a haunted apartment building. And then I did one called The Gate, which was about what if a sort of supernatural take on drug addiction. The idea that there was an addictive drug where what the thing the drug was doing was opening portals to hell in people. And then I had this idea for like a found footage story about homeless runaways in Los Angeles. And then my final one was actually sort of a haunted movie set, because we had worked in Like, Share, Follow for a couple of days at a sound stage in downtown Los Angeles called DC Stages, which was amazing because they had all these standing sets. So they had a jail cell next to a hospital and you just wandered around through these old shabby sets. And I was like, this is the coolest place in the world. I want to think of a horror movie for it. And I did. So I pitched all of those to Blumhouse, and they said, nah. Each one, there was a reason why they didn't think it would work. And this obviously did not please me much. Part of the reason was that Blumhouse was changing their business plan. They had started out on this, we're going to do tons of, the basic idea was we get creative people to do, somebody who wants to do a movie can't necessarily get to do either the movie they want to do, or they can't get this break. We're going to give them the creative freedom if they will keep the budget down, And so that's what was happening was they said, we're not going to do what all other horror studios are doing, which is essentially rebooting major projects and doing big. They said we're not gonna do anything with names, big name stories, big name franchises, etc., etc. However, they were starting to change that. Now they do a lot of them. They got into Invisible Man. They got into the Halloween. They're doing a bunch of that. They moved upscale, and they realized that the business model for the ultra low wasn't actually that good for them. It wasn't working. So I was right at the end of that business model. They had started out with me saying, here's the deal. You're an unknown director, but if you keep the budget low, which I love to do, I love low budget, you can write what you want, do what you want. But when it came down to it, they're like, no, not that. They were starting to think more about their brand and less about let people do creatively what they were doing. So I had this one that I thought, and to me, the cool thing about each one was that I was taking a known part of the genre and giving it some twist, like Portals to Hell, drug addiction. I thought that was really a cool, like a way to explore a real thing through the genre. That's my favorite thing with genre. And so one of the things I really wanted to talk about was the idea of homelessness and runaways. The idea, almost all horror seemed to be suburban. It was there was a trend of horror that was based in the American suburban life, and I felt very little connection to that. I like the city. I grew up in the city, and I wanted to see stuff set there, and so that was the main driving factor. So I rethought this one about the original idea was that a bunch of sort of privileged upscale LA high school students they had to do a like social studies project where they decided they were going to go do interviews with homeless people on Skid Row in Los Angeles. Downtown Los Angeles has a section called Skid Row, which is shocking. That a rich, powerful city would allow camps of homeless people on the sidewalk, but it is there. And so the idea was that they were going to meet this runaway teenager, and the conceit was this teenager appears to be fleeing from something demonic. And what it turns out is the teenager is actually carrying the power to unleash this demonic force. And it is only unleashed when she feels threatened, because she has been abused in her childhood, and she called forth this demonic force. So she's actually kind of trying to run away from herself. She is scared of her own power because it is so violent. And I felt like this was a cool thing. I'll talk more about it when we get into the script. So I said, you know what? I know this is a cool story. But the idea of doing it as found footage really displeased Blumhouse. They were like, found footage is over. We're not doing that. I was like, but this story is so good. So I rethought it. I got rid of the kids doing the documentary. And I just said, what's the story of this young woman on the streets of Los Angeles, having run away from the middle of the country and trying to run away from her own demons, literally. And I thought, oh my God, how cool if we just tell her story. And the story is that basically she's trying to run away from this power in herself. And she runs into two figures. One is running a women's shelter downtown for abused women, and she gets taken into the shelter overnight. And the woman who's running the shelter believes that this talk of demons is psychological. It is that is a way of expressing her own fear of her own violence, that she has been violent personally and is expressing it in terms of demons. She's misunderstanding that it's actually supernatural. So she's trying to help her, but misunderstanding the danger. There's another character who is another homeless teenager who loves the idea of this power. She's like, oh my God, I wish I had a demon I could unleash on people when they came after me. So our main character is caught between these two forces, one of which is trying to tell her that her problem isn't real, but is truly good, and the other one who is truly good but is so wounded that she wants to use it as a weapon. And that's the tension of the story. And I like that tension so much, and I said, that's a story. That's a horror story. So I wrote it. I just said, you know what? I know that I can do this well. I'm going to write it to prove to them how good it can be. I wrote it. They said, yeah, this is really good. And so they said, let's make it. So then they start to give me notes. Now, my feeling about this deal was the whole point of doing something this low budget, this under the radar, is that I get to have creative freedom. That's the deal. That's the trade-off. However, they were changing that plan a lot, and also I wanted to do things my own way. They were beginning to feel like that wasn't a good plan. It wasn't great to let people just do whatever they want and see what came out. So as a result, they gave me a bunch of, they said, let's do it. Let's start scheduling it. Let's start writing it. But here's some notes. And the notes started to get more and more substantial, to serious rethinking, rewriting. The basic thing I wanted to do was no longer being bought. So I argued hard. There was a big meeting, and I made it last 3 hours because I fought them on every point. And at the end of that, they said, you know what? We don't want to do it. So it never got made. Okay. So, and they're right. I was not I was holding them to the letter of their deal. Their deal was, you stay under budget, and you make us a genre piece. You can do what you want. And I was like, okay, then I want to do what I want. Get out of my way. They said, all right, we don't really want to do that anymore. Okay. So, some quick hellos. Hi, Randy. Hi, Gene. Yes, indeed. Blumhouse was using the Roger Corman model, but the truth is they decided that the thing about Roger Corman model is it made a lot of crap. Like now and then he discovered great directors, but mostly, as they pointed out at Blumhouse, they said, we don't want to be Roger Corman. Roger Corman's deal was he would discover Coppola. Coppola would make a crappy movie for them and then go off and work for the studios and never work for him again. So, yeah, all of, Bogdanovich, all of the people who worked with Corman moved on from Corman, and they were like, we don't want to do that. But yes, Blumhouse did use the Roger Corman model at that time. They don't anymore. Hi, Umbra Man. Are you saying that found footage may have been considered too Blair Witchy as a movie? No, I'm saying that the technique of found footage was getting overused. They simply said found footage is what Blumhouse actually sort of was founded on found footage. Paranormal was the big moneymaker that put Jason Blum into horror. He didn't like horror that much before that. Anyway, the idea was after 10 years of that, there had just simply been too many people doing found footage and doing it badly because it's so easy to do that it lures in people to thinking, oh, all you have to do is this. And in fact, it's not easy to make that work. And what I actually did use Blair Witch in my mind, though, is I felt like the power of Blair Witch is the partly the uncertainty of what you are seeing, the uncertainty of whether or not what you're seeing is going to be meaningful at all at any given moment. But what I really liked about Blair Witch was the absolute terror of you go into the woods and you can't get out. And that, what I said was, how cool would it be to do that, but with the city? To make the city into the woods. These kids run away to the city and they can't get out, and it's a nightmare. Found footage. Found footage is a technique where you pretend that you are using documentary or real footage shot and that you are discovering a movie or a story within documentary or security camera footage or anything where you are finding like Blair Witch is the behind the scenes and material of a film crew that never came back out of the woods. So found footage means it's footage that appears to have been made by the victims or people who were involved in an event, which now is only understood through the found footage. Okay, so so here's the thing about this script, and then we're going to get right into it. The main thing about this script is I wrote it knowing I was going to direct it. I knew who the producers were going to be because I was going to work with the group of same producers and crew that had done Like, Share, Follow. I basically, it was something where I absolutely was writing it essentially as a DIY movie, a do-it-yourself, ultra low budget, make your own movie. So therefore, I wrote it not feeling I had to convey to anyone the look, the feel, the texture, because I was going to do it. I didn't need to sell that stuff. I knew what I wanted. I would talk to the production designer. So therefore, essentially this script is written as close to a shot list as possible, which does not make it a great read if you can't get in my head and see what things look like. There's almost no physical description of anything. And I wrote it for that because I didn't need to. I didn't need anyone to see it. I was going to be able to show the people making it what they needed to do. And also because I knew I was going to be directing it, it's way subtexty. It's what's interesting is like I knew exactly how the scenes would play. And so I didn't worry about the fact that a person who's reading it wouldn't understand some of it if they're not good with subtext. Because I knew exactly what every scene was about. So that's the drawback of this script as a reading script. And what I want to talk to you here about the lessons you can learn from this is the idea, the basic things that you can get from it. It's not a great sample of how to write a script for to sell because it's a little under-described. Thank you, Randy. 3216. I am at the moment, I can't answer that because I have like an hour and a half to 2 hours worth of material here. And so for this episode, I'm not taking questions. But what I will do is on Thursday, I'll do an Ask Me Anything and I'll talk about this topic. But for today only, we're only going to talk about this subject. Okay, so let's talk about the lessons that you can learn from this script, Jane. The lessons are about writing for ultra low budget or DIY. That's really where this is a useful script to study. Let's see. The first lesson I want to talk about is simplicity. As you go through the script, you'll notice that most of these scenes are extremely simple in many ways. The main thing is there's really only one thing happening. Now and then it will be there are certain set pieces where the thing that's happening is several storylines are converging, so things are happening. But within that, what's happening in any given part of the scene is extremely simple. And I really think that that's a very, very important thing when you're talking about low budget and DIY, is you really want to keep things very, very simple. Scene to scene, what's happening is not hard to do. That's the key to DIY. So every shot or scene was essentially is not that hard to shoot. At least for me, I knew how to do this stuff. I knew how to shoot every single thing in this story, and I knew how it had to be played. And there are some special effects which I knew I could do because I'll talk about this, but basically I had just worked with some special effects in Like, Share, Follow, so I knew exactly what special effects we could afford. So even within that. But the main thing is, except for one or two visual effects, everything in this, the special effects, would simply be simple, practical things. The main thing I tried to figure out with this is, if you are trying to make something scary, a demonic force, scary, I thought, what is it that you could show on the screen that would be within our power to create? And I thought, what if there's a wind, a hot, smelly wind? Because wind you can show by just having a fan off camera blowing things, so that you see like the papers on the desk by somebody start to little bits of this hot, mysterious wind. Like indoors there shouldn't be a wind, and there is one. That's the sign that the demon is coming. So that I like with that, I thought, okay, that's actually an interesting thing, because you can turn up the orange light a bit, you can give people a bit of heat on their faces, a little bit of sweat, and you can give the room some literally just have a fan, turn on a fan and blow, so that you get this sense of wind, and that can actually be really terrifying because it's unnatural. What I was looking for was, how can I make the supernatural on no budget? The other thing that I wanted to talk about that you can learn from this is, write something that even if you do it badly, it'll probably play. Like, as you work each scene, just think, okay, what is it in this scene that's happening? How can I make sure that, although I wrote it at the absolute highest level of my writing and skills and demanding of the actors, what they are playing at that moment, if you do it badly, it's okay. In other words, the emotions were simple and pure enough at any given moment, and I knew what they had to play at any given moment, so that they're angry here, or they're begging there, or whatever they're doing, I could say, just do this. It reminds me of, in the movie Casablanca, there's a famous scene where in Rick's cafe, there's a bunch of occupying German officers are singing a German drinking song, and it's offending all of the occupied French and Moroccan people in the rest of the cafe. And so one of the people working at the cafe start to sing the Marseillaise, the French national anthem, which is because they are in occupied France, or occupied French territory. And Rick comes out of his office, Humphrey Bogart, and he sees the orchestra is saying, like, should we do this? Should we confront the Germans musically? And Rick nods, and they are allowed to, and they make their confrontation, and they drown out the Germans. That scene, there's a moment when Rick comes out and he looks and he nods. Apparently that was written at the time they were figuring this scene out. So they simply said to Humphrey Bogart, without having any idea what was going on, they said, just stand here. You come out of your office, you look at them, and you nod. He didn't even know why he was nodding. So this is the report I've heard. So that's the kind of thing you want to write. You want to write something where, if this person just does this thing, if they are just angry, or if they are just sad in that moment, when you put it together with the other pieces, it will flow into a dramatic story. That kind of thinking is very useful if you don't have to have someone go through a lot of changes at any given time. Okay. Do you write scripts based on budget? It depends. If I am writing a low budget script, I do. I write very conscious for what you can and can't do on a low budget. Thank you. Hello, Kirby. So the next thing that I think the main lesson is, write something that, even if someone does it badly, you may not get great actors when you are working low budget. And so therefore, do something that the acting is pure enough, it's simple enough. Like, most people can find some form of pure emotion, of anger, of fear, of jealousy, of hunger, whatever it is. If you're saying they have to like have subtle, but if they just have to feel a feeling, most actors can play something that will work. The next thing is, when you are writing for ultra low budget, steer to your strengths. I had made several ultra low budget movies over the decades before. I knew how to do that, and I knew what I was good at. I knew that I'm actually really good at shooting on the street, shooting under a weird, like keeping the crew really, really small, and just using the texture of reality to replace money. Like, you can't build a city street, but you can go and shoot on the city street if you're careful. So I knew how to do that. So I wanted to use that strength because it gives a lot of texture with no cost. So I knew how to do that. You should steer towards your strengths. I knew how to write a super strong story, so I could afford to keep things very, very simple. If you don't know what your strengths are because you're just starting, then steer towards what's really easy. I know that sounds dumb, but it's like really important. If you are working DIY, if you're working ultra low budget, either steer towards the things you know you do well, or steer towards what it's really, really easy to do. There's no shame in that. Try and find stuff that's easy. Big dramatic arguments, deep, deep emotions, quick, clever changes of story. None of that costs anything, and even if you do it badly, it's still pretty cool. Stay cheap, stay limited, all those things. Okay. The other thing that I personally believe is crucial when you are working low budget is you got to do something that's different. Within a commercial genre, you have to do something that even if you do it badly, people still are kind of curious to see it. That was one of the reasons I did Disfigured. I was like, even if I do a horrible job with this, it's such a unique thing in the indie world, and the genre for that was artsy indie film. The genre of horror, I was like, I need to do something different. And for me, Lost in the Woods in the city, in downtown Los Angeles, making that the scary place I've never seen that. I mean, I have never seen that in a low budget horror, which was shocking to me because it's so freaking easy to do. Take the idea if you want. Nobody does gritty urban stories when they're doing low budget horror, and I don't understand why. It's all suburban. Anyway, the other thing that I think is really useful about this script as a writer that you can look at is that it's variations on a theme. The theme is how women respond to toxic male violence. That's what all this movie is about. Every single thing in this story is about different ways and different feelings about the situation in which these men are just toxic and violent and aggressive and predatory. Not all of them, because that wouldn't be variation. There is a guy who is not. There's actually a couple of guys who are not. But the point is, every single character in this story has an approach to that subject, and it is important in every scene. Everything in this is variations on a theme, but I was very careful to make sure that all of the characters are bringing really, really different points of view. One person is very, very religious. One person is very, very mystical. One person is very, very, sort of semi-military, self-defense, self-help. Each character, each of these women in this story are dealing with this ever-present threat. That's what this is about. I think that it helps you create belief in a story, especially in a supernatural story, if the characters in it are approaching it from different points of view, so that you get to hear different takes on the questions of what if there was a demonic force unleashed to protect this woman from aggressive men, from violent men. Instead of most movie writing advice tries to get you to basically over control the audience's reactions, to say, I want them to think this one thing. And what I wanted to do here was have this story going through it. There's our main way of looking at it, which is, what would you do? How would you feel if you found that your rage, your outrage, your hatred, your self-defense violence was unleashed in a terrifying, supernaturally strong way, which I think is kind of a fantasy for most of us. Anyone who has had bad things happen to them, or even been afraid of bad things, there is a part of you that thinks, I am so angry that someone has put me in this position that if I could blow them up with my mind, I would. There's movies like Carrie, stuff like that, which explore this idea. I felt like I wanted to get into, because in Carrie, she's kind of an object of our fear and pity. But I was like, what would it be like if we were really, Carrie was conscious of what she was doing? Carrie's very flat in these stories, in the Carrie versions. So that's what I was looking for. I was looking for a story about different ways to explore how angry and how violent a person who has been attacked can feel, and what you do with that feeling. So that's the point. To me, that was like, that's worth exploring in a story. That's taking this thing that shows up in lots of movies, the demonic force. But my feeling was, what if we felt like the demonic force was inside us, and we felt both liberated and afraid of what was inside us? That's the core of the story. The other thing about this that you might want to look at is the writing itself. I actually do a lot of time where I simply explain what the characters are thinking. I'm going to just quickly say, hi, Larry. I actually did at another time. I will talk about that. I wrote, like as I said, it was The Shining. I wrote as a 2. I wrote one, which was the idea of The Shining as an old movie studio, and one with The Shining as an apartment building. Character reactions, hard to write. Alex, yes. Let's talk about that, because that's actually where I want to go here. So let's take a look at this script. And I'm going to actually go down to, there's a part of this, let me see if I can get to it, 78. Okay, here we go. So, for instance, I often will do this. Sarah doesn't move. This is insanity. She's feeling that, like, I'm just saying what she's feeling. And that she's having this discussion with this guy, Max, and he's like, at this point in the story, he's like, you need to carry a gun. She's not a person who carries a gun. So it says Sarah doesn't move. So the actual direction is she's not moving because she is making a decision. The action she is taking is she is hesitating before making a decisive choice to or not to carry a gun. But what I write is, this is insanity. He feels it too. They both know that this is crazy that they are being put in this position, but he's making his stand. So that kind of writing is, to me, very useful. If I was going to direct this, I could just say, here, this is what we are. I didn't want to get fancy about it. So I actually just say what they're doing. Then here, let's see if I can find, where is it? Okay. Like, Jane is scared. They are in a terrible, desperate place, but this is darker than she thought it would get. Basically, this is a part where Vida, she's a pregnant homeless girl who's very, very experienced on the streets. She has learned that Jane has the power to call forth this violent demon. And she is saying, let's use that. Jesus, how incredible if we could use the demon. Can you pull it forth at will? And they've tested it and found that she could. So now she's saying, we need to use the demon now. And Jane is afraid. She's like, I don't want to start using this weapon. I don't want to weaponize my feelings. But the way I describe it is I'm just saying exactly what it is. They are in a terrible, desperate place. This is darker than she never thought she would be in this position. But then I say, Vida's every day has been this brutal for years, and she is ready to use any weapon she can find. Okay, this is simply telling the actor what's going on in the character's mind. She doesn't relent because she can't. The alternative is letting the city. In other words, I am here describing what the actor is feeling. I'm not describing what they're doing. I'm not describing what the character can shoot. This script is a really good sample of how to do this kind of writing, where I don't do it all the time, but at key moments, I simply explain what someone is thinking because that's going to be playable. That's going to be something that you can play. The actor can play, and I just wanted to make sure I said what was happening in the scene. So I wanted to show this script to you because a lot of scripts don't do this. Interestingly, I read some of the scripts for Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, and they do a lot of this, which I was like, oh, cool, that's really neat. You don't see a lot of that. So I wanted to show you the script because it's an example of two things. One, super, super stripped down writing, and also, weirdly, very on-the-nose internal writing. Okay. Primitive reptilian brain response or inferior function personality types response. You mean, I'm not sure what that means. So try and explain that, Randy, because it sounds interesting. Okay. I have a few questions that I ask myself. What emotion are they experiencing? Do they say something? If they do, yes, exactly. This is, silent and frozen is acceptable, but sometimes I want to explain what's going on in their frozen mind so that the actor knows where they are so that they can play that. Okay. So the other thing I want to talk about this story is that this story basically has a shape. One of the things you can do, remember, when you are writing for low budget, one of the things that costs absolutely nothing is character and structure. Like, it doesn't cost you anything to think of a clever structure where there's a shape to the story. In this case, the shape of the story is, in the first act, they are on the streets of downtown Los Angeles or in Hollywood during the day. In Act 2, it is almost entirely inside this one shelter building for a women's shelter. And Act 3, they're back on the streets, but they are downtown at night. The first streets are Hollywood during the day. So each act has a distinctive feeling, a distinctive texture. This is the sort of thing that you can do with your writing by making these choices, like everything's going to happen in the rainforest and whatever it is that you have access to. I knew I could shoot in Los Angeles because I live in Los Angeles. So I'm like, this neighborhood and this neighborhood, the movement of them, the day to night, these are things that don't cost anything, but they have a huge impact on the quality of the movie. So figuring out your story structure and making sure that your characters are playing out their arcs and that they each have a lot of texture in the character, it's all free. And it means that no matter how, like I said, if you shoot a very vivid character and the actor is so-so, but the scenes are really clear, you're still going to get good scenes. That's okay. Does she do herself in to prevent more violence? No. Partly I don't want to spoil. They're going to be spoilers. That's the other thing I wanted to say is we are now starting the part where I want you to recognize we are at spoilers. So if you are watching this, first of all, if you just want to avoid spoilers and you want to sign off from the live stream now, I will understand. If you are watching this recorded, which most people will be doing, you might want to pause here and read the script because we're hitting lots of spoilers. Okay. So let's talk about this story. The first thing I want to show you is when I talk about really stripped down, let's look at this. This is very descriptive, but I want to show you the absolute simplicity of what I tried to do, because I think that there is a lesson here. Interior function is when the stress the individual responds to is the opposite of the noise. Oh, interesting. That's cool. Yeah, that makes sense, actually. And yes, to a certain extent, that is kind of true here. All right, so let's do the opening of this script. The first thing you read is simply a neat, sweet home in the suburbs of Lexington, Kentucky. In other words, it's essentially a TV commercial, a neat, sweet home in the suburbs. Having said that, I don't want to describe anything else. Boom, we know where we are. Then Jane is icing a made-for-scratch cake. Okay, the made-from-scratch cake thing is the key here. She's putting icing on it, which is pretty. And what we get here is a sense of domesticity, of sweetness. The sweetness is what I was trying to get in this verse. So that's keeping it really simple. Now, this is her character description. She is 17, intelligent, somewhat fragile, and deeply, deliberately conventional. Okay, so the point is, I am not describing her physically at all. It is not important what she, the important thing is the choices she made for how she looks. In other words, hair, clothing, and makeup like she studied broadcast TV. No, broadcast TV commercials to find a style. And it's worked. She wouldn't stand out in a crowd. So this is her character. She is someone who is very afraid of being different. She is very afraid of having the truth of her life be seen because she has been a victim of abuse for many years now. Her stepfather has, we're going about to find this out. But the main thing we see here is that she is trying to be conventional and pretty and sweet because deep inside she is outraged and anguished and angry. And she has been concealing that because it was important to her survival. So that's what we know about her. And that is going to stay central to her character for the rest of the story. We are going to learn that inside that there is a fury, literally fury. Okay. Now, one sentence for Linda, Jane's mom, because she's not going to be in the story very long. But in general, I try to keep most of the character descriptions, except Jane, down to one sentence, just a type. When you are working ultra low budget, start simple. People can develop complexity as they go along, but when you first meet them, you start simple. And that doesn't mean stupid. Simple is not stupid. Simple is very, very precisely one thing. So, Linda, Jane's mom, is starting to prepare dinner, okay? 40-ish, overweight, kind, loving. All I knew, first of all, I knew who I was going to cast. I was going to cast the woman who had been the lead in Disfigured, Deidre, so I knew who I was going to cast. And the main thing about her is she's overweight. And I thought, honestly, in most movies, you just don't see that a lot. And it fit her character, that she's a woman who has made a bargain to stay with a man who she knows is abusive somewhere inside, and she is afraid of losing the man, so she has essentially sacrificed her daughter. And I wanted to suggest, as you'll see in the rest of this scene, so very simple description. Not going to say exactly. They share the kitchen easily, gossiping, laughing. Velvety light bathes the pink frosting and blue frosting flowers. That's one sentence of description to try and give a tone. Then Vance comes home, okay? Simple action. Vance comes home, the man of the house. 40-ish, in a suit, tie loose, out of shape, unimaginative. That's all we need to know about him. He is your classic dad guy. Okay, so in the rest of the scene, he comes home, he sees that she's baking a cake, there's a bake sale tomorrow at school. He runs a fingertip along the side, scooping off the frosting. He ruins what his stepdaughter has done. And he puts it in his mouth and looks at her and licks his lips. So we immediately are seeing in very simple action, like, frankly, the worst actor in the world could do this and it would play really creepy. So that's what I was booking here. And he says, a very simple line, damn, that is good. Jane looks away, so she is simply pretending it didn't happen. That's her character at this point in the story. Someone who is pretending it didn't happen. And Linda says, hey, she's worked on all afternoon on that cake. He says, hey, I took it off the side. No big deal. And then he says, she can smooth it over. She's good at that. So Linda is distressed, but but Jane just, so once again, this is describing their internal states. They'll figure out how to play that. And then the end of the scene, he goes in the living room and turns on the TV. Linda gets a pill bottle from a cabinet, shakes one out, takes it with a cupped handful of water from the sink. Jane doesn't look at them, covering up the damage to her cake. It's still pretty and pink. The kitchen and the daylight are still lovely. So that's the scene. Very, very, very simple. I can break that down into shots. It's basically is broken down into shots in these paragraphs. And that's what I wanted to talk about here, is just the lesson of how to keep things simple and describe them in shootable, playable terms. That is what this script is good for as a writing lesson. That's the point. Then we could talk about some of the horror stuff, but the main thing I wanted you to see here is simply the way that you can write for ultra low budget is keep it very simple, and alternate between things that are so simple anyone can do this. If he puts frosting in his mouth and looks at a girl, it's disgusting. It's gonna work. Doesn't matter. You can do that even with an actor who's not great. And when you're working DIY, you often have actors who have some skills but not a lot. Okay, so Randy is just further explaining the psychological concept of the primal brain. Yeah. So there are both biological and psychological mechanisms within Jane, and the demonic response could be, yes, exactly. Thank you, Anshul. There you go. Yes, I hate Vance too. That's the point. The point is that in this scene, we get a very strong sense of these characters. We know enough about their life. This is basically all we're going to get, except for one other sequence of her home life. Thank you, Poulet. That's so nice of you. Thank you. Yes, exactly. The whole point when you're working low budget is you need to find things that are simple and emotionally powerful and narratively powerful at the same time. Okay, so let's just talk briefly about where this story goes. The entire first act, what happens then is at the end of this pretty but troubled scene, there is a nightmare flash. These flashes are going... when you see supernatural things in a movie, especially in a low-budget movie, they have to be really fast because you actually can't show them. But also there is a violence to the filmmaking by having flash cuts and quick, confusing, frightening imagery. It's just a good trick that horror movies can do, and it doesn't cost anything. You can do, like, blood splattering. You can do that. You could just splatter some fake blood. And then it turns out that this nightmare that we've basically cut from where she lived to now she has run away and she is on the street. Yeah, good. Okay. Should you start with a violent action scene early? In a horror movie, yes. It depends on the story. If you are going to be doing a story, I mean, the thing about any genre is you want to establish the pleasures of that genre. The reason that people go to that genre, you should give them some of it as soon as possible. It's, they're classically now, horror movies tend to start with a teaser kind of opening where something horrifying happens in the first 5-10 minutes. 5 minutes, really. So I did know that the rules of contemporary horror are you can't let it go. Like, it would be cool, like The Shining, starts with just long, like nothing horrifying happens for a while. Anyway. So we meet, what happens is we meet, Jane is now on the street in Los Angeles. So she has left her safe suburban home, and she is a teenage runaway on the streets of Hollywood. And this guy tries to pick her up, and her boyfriend, Randy, comes to her rescue. He has gone to pick up some food and bring it back to her, and he sees this guy. He attacks his car. It's a sort of comical, heroic moment. Teenage Randy fighting this guy through the window of the car. But at the end of that, the guy drives away, and the fast food meal that Randy was bringing got smushed, got run over, which is a suggestion that while Randy is heroic or protective, he's also kind of reckless and unstable. And the rest of the first act is going to be about what we're going to find out is that Jane has done something. Jane and Randy were friends back in their youth, in high school. Not lovers, friends. This is very important. He is very loving of her. He loves her, but he is very protective of her, and he knows somewhere inside, he understands that something horrible is happening to her at her home, and he is just trying to be good to her. And so at a certain point, when Jane unleashes the demon on her stepfather and destroys him, he's slaughtered in their house, she then has to run away. She has murdered him. And although she knows it was a demon, it's going to look like she murdered him. So she immediately runs away. That's all told in very, very brief flashbacks. When she runs away, she goes to Randy and says, like, I'm leaving town. And he says, I'm going with you. He wants to be a singer. So he's going to go to LA and be a country singer. So they both run away together. And they have just arrived in LA as our story really begins. That's what's happening in the first act. She has run away with this guy who truly loves her and wants to protect her. But during the course of the first act, we keep seeing Randy being controlling and dangerous. He's got a violent side, an aggressive side. Like on the street, he gets into arguments with people, and he's very controlling. Now what happens is we discover, so we begin to think, oh my God, she has traded in one horror for now she's with this abusive guy. But we don't see him actually being abusive. He's just very controlling because he's terrified that he won't be able to protect her. So the first act is Jane and Randy in Hollywood having a series of experiences in which we are learning what happened. And we see that Randy, by the end of the first act, although he is very controlling, he's very, very loving and protective. He is not abusive. He's controlling out of fear. And it brings him to a motel room. He finally gets enough money together to get them a motel room. And he basically says to her, listen, I am here for you. I love you. I recognize that you've been abused. I am not going to push anything on you. I will just want you to know that I love you. However, in doing that, he is caressing her. And this is triggering her. And it triggers the demon to come, and the demon slaughters her. So slaughters him. Sorry. That's the first act. The first act is she's run away. She has discovered that she can call forth in extremity this violent demonic force, which is sort of like a mixture of a little girl and a bird, or a bat. It's something scary. And it came and justifiably slaughtered her stepfather. But now on the streets, it came uncontrollably. She didn't want it to kill Randy, and it killed him anyway because it mistook her feelings. It was like, uh-oh, she's feeling threatened. And so it came and killed Randy. Now, the thing is, so that's the first act. It's a day in Hollywood, ends in the evening, and she is then left alone, covered in blood, on the streets of Los Angeles, and she gets picked up by a van which takes in homeless, abused women. gives them an overnight shelter. So that takes us to the transition from the first act to the second act. Okay, now the thing that's happened here is that I've been building up the concept of the demon, the demonic force within her, which she cannot control. That's the important thing. That this force is protective of her, but it doesn't necessarily take subtleties into account. Like the truth is, by the time Randy gets killed, we don't want Randy killed. We recognize that although Randy was a bit of a jerk, he was not a bad kid, and he did not deserve to die. So now we're kind of scared. We, like Jane, are scared of her power. Whereas at the beginning it seemed like, cool, guy deserved it. But now it's like, well, this power is unstable. It can come out and harm someone who doesn't deserve it too, which is how Jane is feeling. She thought, maybe I can run away from it. And the whole point of the first act is she can't run away from it. It's with her. So now she goes into a shelter with other women who have all been abused and mistreated. And one of the people that she's with is this homeless, pregnant girl named Vida, who she met on the street with Randy. Randy was an asshole to Vida, but Jane and Vida bonded. Now, I do want to mention, before we get into the second act, there is a scene that I like, but I recognize that it's cuttable. Okay, so let me... a lot of good stuff. Okay, so there's this scene on page 15. Jane has gone off by herself. She's told Randy, I just need an hour by myself. I've been with you nonstop for days since we left and drove to LA. I just need an hour to myself. Which we kind of like, how cool, look at her. She's standing up for herself. But once she gets out there, she's kind of cracking up. And so we're a little worried about her. And she's on the street in Hollywood, and these people from a cult, if you are in Los Angeles, in Hollywood, you are going to probably run into, or at least certainly you were for a long time, representatives of Scientology. I do not want to get into whether or not Scientology is a legitimate religion or a cult, but certainly your experience, if you were on the streets of Los Angeles, of Hollywood, at least until recently, you were going to run into these people who are like, hey, come and take our free personality test and come to our center where we're going to give you free food and room and board, and you just have to like join our community. So the point about this is early enough. This is page 15. Jane is troubled. You kind of think, uh-oh, is she going to get into this cult? So there's this scene, and it's completely, you could take this scene out, it would not make any difference to the story. But I really like this scene. And my feeling was, I am making this movie according to my instincts. And my instincts are, we have a little room at the beginning for red herrings, for, oh, I'm not sure where this is going. That is not something that movies do much of nowadays. They are so driven to focus on making the machinery work that there's nothing extra. There's nothing nothing lifelike in so many movies. So that's why I like this. And also because, once again, variations on a theme. This character, Nathaniel, is scamming her, basically. But he's got it down to a science. He pretends to not have his papers in order. And I say, it's brilliant. She waits, feeling sorry for her. In other words, this guy is trying to stop her on the street and huckster her, but what he does is he makes himself seem inept as a way to disarm her. But then what he does is he says, wow, he recognizes, as if seeing her for the first time, you are a victim, he says. So the point is, even though this is seemingly an extraneous street, we are actually explaining her vulnerability. Okay, so I really like this scene because it's really creepy in a different way, and I like that. But it could get cut. My feeling was it's not that hard to shoot it. You get a good actor to do it. I think it would help us feel for her vulnerability, because what happens is as he is talking, he provokes her into flashbacks. There's a lot of things happening on the street that are provoking flashbacks, which is how we are understanding what happened to her. Anyway, okay, so let us talk. Let's see what's going on here. Did you figure out how she acquired this power? Yes, that does get discussed later in the story. It's not so much how she acquired the power, according to the mythology of this story, is we all have it. We all have it. She just was forced into such an extreme horror that she connected with it. But the basic idea is that the feeling of rage at being abused is in all of us, especially in the women of this story. And that's actually the end of the story, is that we see that. Okay. I'm emotionally invested in these characters. Yay, I have succeeded. If you do low budget or any kind of scripting right, you can, by simply telling the story, telling someone the story verbally, get them hooked in. That is great. Yes, tragic but realistic. Okay. Yes, exactly. Variations on a theme. That is what we are talking about. Do you use your angel? No, I did not. Okay. Red herring frog. Yes. Okay. So basically, I'm not going to get into too much detail here, but in the second act, what happens is Jane is here. She's taken. There's a lot of good writing here. So let me show you. So this is the way I handle flashbacks. The principle of flashbacks here is that they were going to be extremely fast. The way that they come back to her, she is trying to repress these feelings, and they are only breaking through emotionally. So therefore, I wanted the filmmaking to reconstruct that, also because that's something that's very controllable in shooting and editing. In other words, once again, the thing you want to do with DIY is find tricks that work even if you do them badly. A flash cut, a shocking cut, a quick bit always works. It doesn't matter how bad that bit is. It will work in a toilet paper commercial. So I know that this is a trick that I can use that will work. And it's really simple to do. All you do is you shoot one thing, you plan it out, you shoot the other thing, you cut them together real fast, boom, it's going to work. That is what you're always trying to find when you are working low budget. Okay, so basically what's happening is Randy's talking to her and she's saying, whatever happened, he had it coming. He's saying, I know that something happened to Vance and that we have to run away from it. And then she has a very fast flashback. And he says, I'm not asking. I don't need to know. Very fast flashback. So she's having flashbacks. He's basically provoking flashbacks in her, not recognizing that that's going to cause the demon. What happens is the demon comes, it kills it, and all I say is Randy is like, I know that I would have shot that with some real gore, real quick flashes of gore. I didn't bother to write that because I knew what I was doing. I knew I was directing it. I knew how to do it. And I in the flashbacks, we had also shown it. I didn't want to overdo the writing. But the truth is, as a reading script, I did not do a good job with that. This should have been described more. This is on page 24. Okay. Jane goes to a convenience store. She's covered in Randy's blood. She has left this motel crime scene. And she realizes that she's covered in blood. So she goes to a convenience store and she steals a box of wipes. And she's just standing there wiping the blood off her. And this van shows up. and Sarah talks to her. Now Sarah can see that this girl is like, by now she's mostly cleaned up, but so we meet Sarah. Sarah brings her back to the shelter, Vida, but we now meet 6 other characters, 6 other women, and Max, who's works with is Sarah's boyfriend and works with him at the shelter. The entire middle of the script, we're on page 26. The next basically 70 pages is all going to be in this one location, the shelter. That's one of the most important things you need to do with your low budget, is find limited locations that you can set most of the story in and not feel stir crazy. Things where you find that you can work and keep it interesting and dramatic, which could be one room. It depends on how you're playing it. But the main thing is you want to limit the number of locations. It is very difficult to go from location to location. When you shoot, it costs a lot of time and a lot of money. So the rest of this story, we're meeting these other characters. Each of the other women represents a response to abuse. Each of the other women has a take on abuse, and those each get played out. The main conflict is between Sarah and Vida. Sarah is saying we need to take this as a mental health issue. And Vida is saying we need to weaponize this demon, which I believe in. At the end of the second act, Sarah learns that, in fact, it's a real demon. Everyone learns that. And so, like I said, spoilers, at the end of the second act, the conflict the main pressure of this story is that Jane is not sure who to trust in looking for help between these 2 women. At the end of the second act, she chooses Vida. She chooses to essentially risk trying to weaponize her power. Sarah, therefore, having learned that this is real, feels a responsibility to stop them. So the conflict resolves into Sarah and Max versus Jane and Vida. That's the structure of the story. Randy is there to establish the power and the danger. Then we meet the main set of characters. Is that following the rules of screenwriting? Hell no. I didn't feel I needed to. It was my 50th script. I know how to write a script. I knew that I could pull this off. So basically, however, I do believe it's part of one of the reasons that other people couldn't quite understand how it would work. Because we start with this one character and then we kill him off and then we meet all the real characters. Okay. So in the final story, we have now Sarah, who wanted to help Jane, now feeling that she has to help Jane essentially by imprisoning her, by medicating her and getting her into some kind of hospital where she will not be destroying people because of the demon inside her. And so Sarah is still well-intended and good, but what's happening now is she has become the main threat, or a main threat. Anyway, so that's the shape of the story. I don't think I'm going to get into too much detail. If you have questions, please ask them in the comments or email them. But basically, the thing I wanted you to see about this script is how you can write horror and low budget. I wanted to give you a concrete example of keeping things. Every single thing in this is actually very, very simple. Like there's a sequence towards the end where, which is very special effectsy, where a bunch of guys in a car try to attack the girls. And it's very much a horror movie moment that Jane steps in front of their car. It's been in like 500 horror movies. Somebody standing in front of a moving car, and the car stops, and they're like there, and you realize they have powers. And then everyone in the car gets destroyed by the demon. But the thing is, special effects wise, all that means is you've got a car parked and there's blood splattering on the inside of the windows, which you could do with a balloon. A balloon and some fake blood, and you got it. And if you want to shake the car a little, there's some things you can do. And first of all, you can do it by not shooting the entire car, but even there are ways to make a car shake. But certainly the easiest way is just don't show the whole car and have people shake the car. So that's the kind of thinking that goes into it. It's like, I tried to say every single thing in this story is very, very doable. It's very, very practical, except for a couple very few special effects shots, which I knew exactly how to pull off because I had worked with a special effects company. And so I knew that they were within the budget. So that's the lessons I wanted to have here. And I think that the important thing, let me see if there's any other big messages I want to show you. I think you'll see if you go through it what the set pieces are. And sometimes, like, there's one set piece right towards the center, which is just a long conversation between Sarah and Jane. There's just two people sitting in a room, and Sarah is trying to gain Jane's trust and help Jane. And Jane is telling Sarah the actual truth, but she sounds insane. So that's actually a remarkably long dialogue scene. But once again, I was steering towards my strengths, because when you are working DIY, do things you know how to pull off. I know how to pull off a long dialogue scene. Okay, let me see what we got here. It's great how you spread the graphic violence out. Yes, not only did I spread it out, but I really tried to increase it and build up, including there's a cool fake out scene where somebody thinks that they are going to, there's something scary is going to happen. It turns out not to be. There's other ones where you almost get it, and then because we've seen it before, we're terrified even though it doesn't turn violent. But what's terrifying is that she is drawing it out deliberately. And then one other thing I want to talk about here, let me see if I can find it. I did a thing which I really like, but often people say is bad. Let's see, here we go. Here it is. Okay, so what's happening, what I did was I set up a scene where Vida privately goes to Jane in her room and says, if you've got this demon, can you control it? Can you call it up at will? And Jane's like, I don't know, I've never tried. And so they try. So it's these two girls essentially playing with fire in one room of the shelter. In the office of the shelter, having been disturbed by what she's heard, Sarah is doing research online with Max about these demons. And Max, college guy, he knows that there is in fact in Greek mythology a thing called the Furies. There's these three creatures, which is what I based this demon on, these sort of harpy, bird-like clawed female figures who are part of Greek mythology. So I believe that one of the things that happens in a genre is you take the cliches of the genre and you try to make them work as well as you can because you like the cliches. The audience wants the cliches of the genre to be touched upon in an interesting, original way. So what I did, the famous explainer scene in most horror and sci-fi, where somebody explains the backstory of the demon or something. In this case, Max and Sarah are on the computer, so we're seeing images that they are finding as they are researching. So we get to see the classical art images of the Furies, because there are many of them and they're really scary. They're great. So we're intercutting them looking at these horrifying pictures and reading stories about or interpretations of what the Furies are. And in the other room, these two teenage girls are actually trying to call one up and the wind is starting to swirl. So all that happens is that the wind is coming. They get interrupted so that the demon doesn't show up yet. But the tension of those two things cutting back and forth between the images of the demon and these kids calling forth the demon, I think would be a really, really cool sequence. Anyway, so that's such a thing I wanted to point out is cool to see. As a fellow Randy, I would like to say I managed to curb my... yes, this is true, Randy. Not Randy, like, yes, you are Randy also. And yes, no, that's actually one of the most important things about this script is in doing variations on a theme. One of the things I tried to do was make sure that Randy is a good guy, and is actually a victim. And Max is a good guy in the story. And it's important that I didn't want to make this a story where all men are evil. Most of the men in the story are evil. That's because, honestly, a lot of men are evil. Anyway, the point is, go through the script. You'll see that each character has a moment when they have a thing that they bring to the question of what do women do in the face of male violence. There's a lot of cool structural things I do with that. Enjoy. Let's see. Okay. Yay. All right. Yes. Small budget is difficult. I would say small budget is a glorious thing. I love low budget. Hey, Naja, good to see you. Should the shooting location or environment foreshadow or amplify the characters? Not should, but can. Yes. Sometimes you actually work opposite. For instance, the idea for me about the city locations was that you were going to feel at the mercy of the heartless city. That absolutely was true, and it's a good scary feeling. And this is a horror movie, and I wanted to emphasize that. Also to emphasize the idea that in this story there is a supernatural horror. The supernatural horror is essentially a symbolic way to explore a real horror. And most of the story, what's horrifying, that even before demons show up, this is horrible. These people are abused runaways, okay? It's already horror. That was what I wanted to do, was to say we don't just have like, oh, everything is pretty and nice and then there's supernatural, because that suggests that the horror isn't real. And what I wanted to do was make sure that you feel the reality of the horror, because the real horror is the way that people abuse each other. Okay. And yes, I wrote the story as a director. Hi, Big Racy Bulliano. I am afraid I am about to leave. I usually do only an hour. I ran over this time because it was a big topic. I urge you and everyone here, just because it's fun to think that people are reading my script. The script is available for free, PDF. Just go to the link in the description and you can get your own copy of the script. You can read it. I think that it should be somewhat clear if you break down, well, what is happening here? In other words, look for setups and payoffs. There's a character who shows up, the husband of one of the abused women in the shelter. When we're introduced to the shelter, he is outside the shelter. And so he is used to demonstrate the protective qualities of the shelter and to reveal the relationship of Sarah and Max. That's his purpose when we first meet this guy named Ken, who's outside the shelter trying to get in. So he's there. He seems to have a purpose. It seems clear. It's like, okay, now we know about this shelter and now we know about this couple and we understand. Then at the end of the second act, he's back. And we think, oh, yeah, of course he's back. We kind of forgot about him. There's a pleasure in the setup and then the new use of a thing. That happens a lot. Anyway. Okay. You don't expect the best from your actors. Does that make possession stories difficult to do? No, not at all. Possession is really easy to do. The whole point about possession is like you get all twisty and green. You give somebody some eyeshadow and you shoot them right. They're possessed. It's fine. Okay, with a lot of men of threat and threat of men's story. Horror indeed. Yes, thank you, Kelly. That is the whole point for me about doing genre and about doing low budget is to say, this is an opportunity to do things that don't get done, that aren't looked at this way. There's a lot of stories about women taking revenge on violent men, etc., but I didn't feel like anyone was dealing with them the way I did. And the main thing is, I think that the point of genre is to use the cliches of the genre, the predictable element, to open up emotions that we otherwise steer away from. And that's really where you can use genre to get superpower, emotional value, truth. Those interested in low budget. Yes, Wake the Witch made in Lincoln. Yes, it's absolutely. There's a lot of I've heard of that one actually. Anyway, that's the if you are interested in DIY, check out Wake the Witch made in Lincoln. But also just check out DIY. There's tons of them now, lots of them, and you can learn how this is done. The thing I wanted to show you here is one of the things that's very hard to learn about low budget is the importance of good writing to make up for low budget. The writing is free. No, you can do what you need in the script for nothing to make it work so that when you end up shooting, you have a power driving the sometimes crappy camera work or the bad sound or the iffy acting. Those are all things that people can overcome if the characters and the story are top-notch. And the characters and story are the thing you totally control. You just have to remember to do things in a way that you can trust that you can pull them off under bad circumstances. Okay. I am assuming that Gene is telling us about another ultra low budget or low budget movie, Miriam's Day Off. Either that or It's Miriam's Day Off. Okay, so I'm going to be signing off now. I will see you on Thursday. I will be answering questions freely. That'll be an Ask Me Anything day, since I didn't really answer anybody's questions today, except if they were about this. And with that, I say to you, go write something.